Well,
Yeah,
it's always
membership.
interesting because yeah. Go ahead, John.
What we're almost getting time to start, but to me, there's two factors of membership, and I think y'all touched on it a good bit. First off, what does a member do? Well, a part of the body works with the body. So you've got people that'll attend services, even contribute, and they'll go for 6, 7 months, maybe a couple of years, and they are working better than some who have identified with the congregation. But if someone openly refuses to identify out of they don't want to commit or whatever, then I think you do have an issue there that needs to be kind of taught on. Like what y'all are even talking about. Because if they say no, I don't want to place membership or identify with, we just like to attend here. Well, they're welcome to be visitors, but they're not going to participate in worship like the other men. There are certain responsibilities that are fulfilled by members of the congregation. And and you should
By the way, Brian,
try to get them to be a part. But
Brian, are you talking some about what was taught in class with your?
No.
We had a study on the church at our camp, and the emphasis was on the universal and local church.
So did you guys talk about membership?
Yeah, he talked a little bit about it, and yeah, let me just leave it there.
Yeah,
it is it is an autonomous
Yeah.
subject, though.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, yes, John.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a challenging thing when it comes to the local church. I have my opinions, and I think it's an opinion. I mean, other than temporary circumstances, I believe God expects us to be part of a local church. I wouldn't kick somebody out if they chose not to identify. And there may be reasons. There may be reasons why we won't accept somebody. But you would tell them, you're welcome to attend here, but we're not going to accept you into our membership because of some reason, and it better be a biblical reason, from that standpoint. But I think the Bible talks about the local church enough that it's important. I mean, he expects us, except for, I think every example in the New Testament where you find somebody that was not a member of the local church, that we know they wouldn't have been, or we can assume they weren't, it was always temporary.
I think one of the biggest issues is for elders, you're responsible for the members of your congregation. Yes. So how do you know who they are without a clear line? In other words, this guy that's visited us for 5 weeks, am I responsible for him? He wasn't here on the 6th week. Do I need to find out what's going on, or is he not a member? I think for that, and of course, without elders, we're still responsible. So it just one of the things I see is that this concept of responsibility and accountability requires you to have kind of a clear idea of who it is that you're responsible for or accountable to. So I think that's why membership is. That's why, like I said, and I agree completely with John. It really kind of is each congregation is going to have to determine this on their own. I tend to push very black and white on membership, and I say, there's an expectation. Are you going to submit to others? Are you going to be accountable to others? And do you allow the elders, if there are elders, to be responsible for you?
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, and honestly, if one's not a member, in my opinion, the elders do not have responsibility.
I agree.
They can't. And that goes back to the question: can you call on somebody that's not a member to lead a prayer or do something like that? The answer is yes.
I view that
but
differently.
That also leads to the question of faithfulness. If somebody is faithful, aren't they going to want to be part of a congregation? I think one of the greatest benefits of elders in a congregation or being part of a local church is if you genuinely want to go to heaven, you want to be accountable, and you want to be held accountable. And those who refuse to identify with a local church, many of them are basically saying, I don't want to be accountable.
Agreed.
Well, we need to get started. This would make for an interesting discussion later. I do think, in a sense, oversee the flock that is among you. There's not too many conditional statements on there. They're among you. I think if you've got someone who's a visitor, there is certain areas where they are under the oversight of the eldership. If they teach false doctrine, if they become a poor example on the congregation, if they're starting to hinder the work of the church, I think the elders have every right to go and talk with them, because they've chosen to be among them. Even if it's for 4 or 5 weeks, if they're worshiping there, they're under the oversight of the elders. Now, going back to what you're saying, Brian, I can understand that point too. The elders need to ask, well, what point do we need to go visit Bob, who's been visiting with us for 5 weeks, who hasn't been here for 1 week? I kind of see that direction as well.
Yeah.
That's interesting, though.
Yeah, we can make other comments, but like you said, I guess it's time to get going. So.
Yeah, it's about 11:05, which isn't too bad. Sometimes we get started later.
Right. Well, yeah, and like you said, maybe this is we're talking about a topic when we get done, possibly.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear this. Yeah.
Hey,
talk about the relationship between the universal and local church.
Let me ask you one quick question. What would be a better term to use? Membership within a local congregation or fellowship with a local congregation?
I like to say fellowship. Here's my answer. Fellowship is the universal.
Yeah.
Membership is the local. And companionship, keeping company, is the relationships we have with both insiders, worldly people, outsiders. So I have a sermon called The Three Ships, the membership, fellowship, and companionship, and how you can place them. It's more contrived, though, because I'm just trying to see that there's different ways we do different things. Like when Paul says, don't keep company with somebody, he uses that keeping company both with people in the world and with people that are members of the church. So that's not the same as membership or fellowship. So
Jimmy says, can y'all explore this next week during our study? All right. Good question. But stay tuned. We'll be right back. Greetings. Welcome back to another Truth Factor discussion. Here in just a moment, we'll continue our study through the Gospel of John. We are in chapter 20, and we're going to pick up with verse 30. Gentlemen, it's good to have everyone with us here today. Let's go ahead and bring the group in. We have not quite everybody. Bob's not able to be with us today, and Brendan, he'll probably jump back into the study once we have completed our study through the Gospel of John. But everybody doing all right so far? All right. Real quick, if you have any thoughts or comments, we definitely would love to hear from you. If you are on the Facebook side of the world, comment then on this live stream. If you're on the YouTube side of the world, use the chat area for that. If you would like to send us an email, you can send it to questions@truthfactor.com or truthfactorlive.com. Both of those will work. Or you can also email us individually, as you see on the screen there. John at Paul at etc. truthfactor.com. So we left off last week with Thomas not having been able to see Jesus as early on as the other individuals did. And so now we have him coming before, and John, the writer, the Apostle John, tells the story here where Jesus said, reach your finger here and look at my hands, and reach your hand here. And then Jesus says, Thomas, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. Now, after recording that statement, the narrator, John here, then steps aside and he says the following. I'll read it. This is what we looked at partly last week, and we'll see if there's any other thoughts on it before we move on. John then writes, and truly Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. So what he did is he took this event from the last days that Jesus walked on this earth with his apostles, and he brought that forward, that statement, to Christians, even of today's time, who've never seen Jesus, but yet read the things that he's done so that we might believe. Any final thoughts or comments on verses 30 and 31 before we continue?
Yeah, John, the reason I wanted to just minimally focus on this, not a whole lot, is, this is typically in every book of the Bible, if you study hard enough or you study long enough, you'll find a verse in there or a phrase that basically defines the book. This is the text that is the summary of the Gospel of John. I've written these things down here so that you will believe that Jesus is the Christ. And some of the things that are significant about this statement is, first of all, John makes the point there that I haven't written down everything. Matter of fact, he goes on and says, I can't write down everything. He actually says that at the end of chapter 21 as well, in even more succinct. But he's making the point that Jesus did a lot of things during life, and they're not written. They are not recorded. I mean, we have examples of where it just says Jesus healed multitudes. He healed them all. So we don't have all the details. I suspect that there are parables that Jesus taught that we don't have recorded. I suspect that there are interactions. When I say I suspect, I kind of know. I think we can necessarily infer that the sermons that we have, for the most case, are a synopsis of what he actually taught. In other words, there was more. When people come together on a mountain, the Sermon on the Mount can be read in about 15 minutes. If you're a slow reader. And did he say more? Very likely he did, and it's somewhat of a summary. So you've got this idea, to understand about that. But what we do have written is what we need. And I think that's the significance of verse number 31. I've written down what God wants me to write down. And what we have written, I would take you to 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 16 and 17. All scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, reproof, correction, instruction, and righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, thoroughly furnished unto every good work. And you could tie the other verses to that. So I see that as the significance of this particular verse. And of course, he also makes the point there at the end of verse 31, believing you may have life in his name. So this is the answer to eternal life. So that's my thoughts.
All right, Caleb?
Well, I was going to echo what Tom is saying is, one, it proves that there's other things that John didn't write about. So when Paul brings up things in 1 Corinthians 15, it all harmonizes, because John says there's many other things I could talk about, but I'm not going to mention them now, but you can read about them in other places, like Paul's account that Jesus appeared to more than 500. Like Tom said, he's summarizing a lot of things throughout the Gospels because you can't say everything. But at what point is it redundant? Paul talks about 500 witnesses. If we had a court date and I brought 500 witnesses, most likely the judge is going to say we only can take 5 or 10 because it becomes redundant. There's too many things. The witnesses are repeating things that we already know. And at what point, in the Gospels does it become repetitive or redundant, where we don't need? Okay, Jesus already performed this many miracles. We don't need it. We don't need to mention another 1,000 miracles that he performed or other sightings that people had after his resurrection. And I think it's interesting that he summarizes this after Jesus' resurrection of the 40 days. How many times did Jesus appear and talk to him that we don't know about? I mean, at least several more times that Paul mentions in 1 Corinthians.
Yeah.
And it's how many more evidence do you need? He gave us enough to believe.
Right.
So you got to believe.
Yeah,
That's true.
Yeah, exactly. Amen, Caleb. One other thought, as you were bringing that up, we have 4 Gospels, and of course, all 4 Gospels have some independent things in them. But the Gospel of John, which almost all scholars who are biblical scholars acknowledge that it was the last of the Gospels. And we describe it as supplemental. At least I kind of describe it as supplemental to what had already been written. John very likely had seen some, if not all, of the other Gospels. And 90 to 95% of what is in the Gospel of John is unique to the Gospel of John, and yet he still says there are many other things written. And my point of that is, he did more than even what is in all four Gospels. A whole, and I think he did a whole lot more. I mean, think about it: 3 to 3.5 years, and that's his ministry. We have one day of the first 30 years, other than his birth. I mean, we have a recording of one week. A couple of things that happened during that week, and that's it. So, what all did he do? We don't know, but what is recorded is enough.
Okay. All right. Brian.
You guys said everything I want to say, some heavy stuff. I do think it's a big deal to get the sense that there's a lot of times in the Bible that they'll tell you exactly what the point of the book is. But what's neat is that John says it's the signs and miracles that he brought forth here that give us sufficient reason to believe. But what's interesting is John has the least record of miracles of the other writers. They all record more miracles than John did. John only has 7 miracles, that are performed by Jesus. And so it's kind of a great point to say, all throughout scriptures, we see people that believed in Jesus without miracles, or people that believed in Jesus with only one miracle, or, like the centurion saying, I don't even need to be there for this to work. It's interesting that so many people say, well, I need a sign from God to believe. John is kind of a testimony that you really don't, that everything that you need is right here to believe. And not just everything in the New Testament. He's saying everything you need to believe in God is in John. And that if what is written in the book of John isn't enough for you to believe, then nothing is going to be. Then that's a powerful testimony to the idea that belief is our choice, and that we have to make a choice to believe.
Yeah, and the belief, everything that you need from a belief standpoint is in the Gospel of John, but that's not everything we have to do. I mean, I don't think John mentions baptism. He mentions the baptism of Jesus. I'm talking about Mark does.
Maybe in John 3, yeah.
Yeah, the Great Commission. From that standpoint. I also find it interesting that what you just mentioned about the signs that he did, go back to verse 29 that was mentioned at the beginning. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. So you've got that point from that standpoint. We haven't seen the miracles, but there is enough evidence that they were performed. Matter of fact, the circumstantial evidence in favor of Jesus having performed miracles, in my estimation, by far outweighs the arguments against them, because the only argument that a skeptic has is, well, I haven't seen it, therefore it couldn't have happened. I haven't seen a miracle, therefore miracles have never happened. Well, you know what? If you're 100 years old, we're talking 2,000 years ago. How do you know what happened then?
Yeah. I would say, like Brian put in our little personal chat, I think John 3, the baptism there is what would be ultimately the baptism of Mark 16:16, and Matthew 28.
Good point. Yeah. I didn't think about that, but yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. Being born again of the water and the Spirit. Yeah. I believe that water is talking about baptism as well. So that's a good point. Jesus doesn't bring it in as the Great Commission toward the end.
Yeah.
But he emphasizes it. And again, bear in mind, John's written last, and if it's supplemental to the others, read what Matthew said, and go on. Just go from there. So.
All right, Bob, what were you going to say?
I forgot. It's been so long since I raised my hand. No, just kidding. I didn't hear everything because I did come in late. But when he says this book, I really think he's talking about his gospel. As Brian mentioned, he only lists about 7 miracles, and that's all is really needed. Those 7 miracles to inspire belief, and that's what he's saying. These are written that you might believe that Jesus Christ is the Christ, the Son of the living God. But as has been pointed out already, also, there are not only the miracles of John, but the miracles that is mentioned in John, but the miracles in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And as far as John 3:5, yeah, people, when they get to John 3:5, if they're reading straight through the Bible, they will have already read Mark 16, 15, and 16. They would have already read Matthew 28, 18 through 20. They would have already read these other references to water baptism. And again, in Acts or in Luke chapter 24, Jesus, in Luke's account of the Great Commission, said, repentance and remission of sins should be preached in his name among all nations. And well, what happened there? Well, when Peter preached that, he sandwiched baptism between repentance and remission of sins. And we don't know if the book of Acts had already, probably though, the book of Acts had been written by this time. If it was written probably within a 2-year, shortly after the 2-year imprisonment of Paul. And of course, we don't know how long that lasted, but Paul was beheaded around, well before AD 70, I'm sure, according to tradition. So people would have already seen the necessity of baptism. And so John 3:5 would be an allusion to that. And so when John gets to his account of the Great Commission, he doesn't need to mention that.
Okay. All right. Let's see real quick before we go forward. We have a comment or a question. And Jimmy dropped in. So let me bring it up here real quick. There's actually 2 of them. First thing he says, do we think we still have signs today? You know, many of the signs Jesus did, but these are written that you may believe. And then Jimmy goes on to say, we often say the Lord works in mysterious ways. Would those not be signs of some sort? The idea of the Lord working in mysterious ways is more something that we have adopted. I say we, the religious world in general. We know that from a biblical standpoint, there are mysteries, of course, to the way that God works, but to try to use that to try to find signs today, we can't do that. I really think the best answer to the question, yes, there are signs, but these are the signs written in the scriptures. We don't need modern day miracles or anything to confirm the word, because the word has already been confirmed. But that's my thoughts. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
David said, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows handiwork. So the heavens are a sign. They're a sign that they were created by God. And so look around you. Everything you see is a sign of creation.
Sign of his power?
Nothing comes from nothing.
Yeah.
If nothing ever was, nothing would ever be. And something is, so something has always been. And the only thing that fits that criteria is God, being self-existent and eternal.
Right. You know, and tying to what Bob said there, Romans 1:20, you know, the same thing in the New Testament. You got that. So, Brian, I think you had something. I think I walked over you.
You said what I said. I was going to say Romans 1:20. I would just say that there's a lot of things that God says are going to happen in the world that happen, and you could say those are signs. Last night we were in our Bible class just talking about how this CEO on a major corporation was caught, you know, in adultery, and probably all of us know the story of how, you know, it was just a random camera moment that caught him and this person he was having an affair with, and but God says in the scriptures that your sin will find you out. I mean, God makes these statements about He doesn't let sin stay covered up. And I think we, from time to time, have these moments where, you know, hey, what God said is true. You know, what God said will happen happens. And we can take that as a sign. You guys have really answered it, though. We're not talking about necessarily miraculous signs. Whereas in John, he is talking about miraculous signs. He's saying Jesus performed specific miraculous signs. Tom made a private comment to say and the specific signs that John selects are signs that point to his being both the Christ, the Savior of man, and being the Son of God, being God in the flesh. That's what each sign either points to Jesus as our Savior or Jesus as God that John selects, and they're very specifically selected to accomplish that.
Yeah,
You know,
that's true.
also, not all signs are miracles, but all miracles are signs. And
Yes.
as far as God works in mysterious ways, His wonders to perform, I've always thought of that as a reference to God's providence. He works out things behind the scene. We don't know how He does it, but I mean, Romans 8:28, all things work together for good to those who are the called. And so God doesn't cause everything, but He gives us the wisdom to react responsibly to whatever does happen in ways that would benefit us. And so, we don't always know. I mean, when I moved to Macon, I did not know precisely what I was in for. I did not know whether I could benefit the congregation here or whether they could benefit me. But after being here for some time, I decided it was providence, not just providence for me, but providence for the congregation that I believe they have benefited with my being here, and I believe I have benefited from my being here, and yet the decision to come was based on my granddaughter having been born at about a year old, and I wanted to be closer to her as she grew up. So anyway, we don't know what's going to happen. We prepare for the worst and plan for hope for the best, and so and then do what God wants us to do in spite of our outward circumstances. I know it doesn't have anything to do with miracles, but
Right. Yeah. And,
Well, that'd be signs, right?
yeah,
That you're talking about.
All right. Yeah. And kind of building on what Bob says, I think if you want to say God's working in mysterious ways, I agree with the idea of providentially. Whatever He's doing today would be providentially. But just a couple of quick observations. The expression "the Lord works in mysterious ways" is not in the New Testament, to my understanding. And typically, when the New Testament talks about the mystery, it's a reference to God's word, the prophetic word being ultimately fulfilled. I know, at least in Paul's letters, that's the emphasis that he has on the mystery.
and so His plan.
Yeah, God's plan. Yeah. I'm making known to you the mystery, God's plan. And ultimately, what Paul was saying is it was in God's plan all along that the Gentiles are just as much a part of God's plan as the Jews. And that's the emphasis of that word mystery from that standpoint.
One of the Bibles I have has a list in the prefix of things not said in the Bible. And one of the things that was not said in the Bible is every tub shall sit on its own bottom. So apparently somewhere along the line, somebody started saying that, and they said it so much, or so many people were saying it, people thought that's in the Bible. Every tub shall sit on its own bottom. Now, that's true, but it's not in the Bible.
Okay. Try not to go down the rabbit trail too far. Deuteronomy 30, verse 11, Moses tells that second generation, "For this commandment which I command you today is not too mysterious for you, nor is it far off." And footnote says not hidden from. I think the same thing could be said even in the New Covenant. What's been given to us is not mysterious, not hidden from us. It's just the things that the Lord hasn't revealed that we don't need to know until we know. So. All right. Would you say it's breakfast time?
Yeah.
Specifically by the sea.
Yeah,
Let's go ahead. Yeah, let's go ahead and start. Bring myself back. Oh, I am up there. Let's start in chapter 21 now. And let's go and let's read. Let me find my cursor here. Paul, would you mind reading for us? Now let's go ahead and read through verse 14. It's kind of a lengthy read, but it'll be a good context there.
Be happy to do that. Really good
What
thoughts on the
translation?
previous verses. I had started to say a couple things, but they were said in a better way by the other gentlemen.
Okay.
So, but I appreciate that. I'm going to be reading in John 21, verses 1 through 14 out of the English Standard Version.
English Standard? Let me catch up with you on that one.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
I
that
can,
is
I
as
can switch
scriptural.
if it's easier.
It's as scriptural as the King James is. Almost. Now go ahead, Paul, whenever you're ready.
All right. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, I am going fishing. They said to him, we will go with you. They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, children, do you have any fish? They answered him, no. He said to them, cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of the fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved, therefore, said to Peter, it is the Lord. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, about 100 yards off. When they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place, with fish laid out on it and bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish that you have just caught. So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. Now, none of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the 3rd time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Paul.
Sorry
Now-
for that little break. I had to scroll a little bit. So,
It's all right. It's the problems of modern day technology.
yes.
All right. So, Paul, let's kind of fill the gap in here for just a minute. When you look at all the gospel accounts, when Jesus was, when he appeared to Mary, he said, go tell my disciples to go to Galilee, okay, because they were down in Jerusalem. The Sea of Tiberias, which sea is that?
Is that not the Sea of Galilee?
It is.
It is.
Yeah. It's oftentimes it'll be called, at least like the Sea of Gennesaret, the Sea of Chinnoeth, whatever. Sea of Tiberias will probably relate to the city that it's near. Okay. So think about this. This is now his appearance to them in Galilee, having told them to go up there. Any thoughts about the fact that they were out fishing?
That was their livelihood.
I don't think they had abandoned the cause of Christ and of Jesus to go back to fishing, but they did know a lot about fishing. And you know that they're fishermen because it says here that they were large fish. And, any fisherman's going to tell you that the fish he catches are large fish. And they knew the exact number that they had caught. And so any fisherman's going to be able to tell you, well, we caught so many today. I've asked people before, they'll go away on a fishing trip up to Minnesota or something, and they'll say, well, we caught, and they usually can tell you the exact number and which days they caught what fish. And so here the disciples say, yeah, we caught large fish, 153 of them, and it was surprising to them the net was not torn. But I don't think they had abandoned Jesus, or that he'd already appeared to them, and they're going to have work to do. They probably don't fully grasp that yet, but here we do see that they're skilled at it, and so they needed food, and that was the way to go about that. They may have enjoyed that kind of work as well.
Yeah. Paul, not to disagree with you, because I agree that they had not abandoned Jesus. But I kind of sense in this that after Peter's denial, everything else that's happened, and it was the denial of all the apostles. Understand, it wasn't just Peter. But I kind of see him saying, Jesus has come back, and I almost think he's saying, I'm preparing to go back to my old job. But Jesus has to carry him further than that. So that's just kind of the idea in my mind. I just picture Peter on this occasion that he can't get over what he did, or he's struggling to overcome what he did, and I think that's why this event is recorded. And the idea of they're going fishing, we need to make a living, and that's what we know how to do. I like I said, that's my thought. But no, even with that, it wasn't abandoning Jesus. But there's the uncertainty. So anyways, that's my thoughts.
All right, Brian?
So I think there's a couple of really significant points to draw of this. Number one, Gospel of Matthew, Jesus told the disciples, you need to go to Galilee and wait for me. But in like Mark and Luke, it talks about Jesus just meeting with them directly. What's neat about John is John reconciles the idea, in case there was any question, that Jesus did meet with them directly right after he was raised, John chapter 20, twice, in fact. And then they did go to Galilee like he commanded, John chapter 21, which kind of brings it together, that you don't have, as the skeptic would say, well, look, there's two different stories of how this happened. No, John reconciles both of them. He says, yeah, they both happened. Jesus did meet with us afterwards, and yet we did go to Galilee like he commanded. The second thing I think is significant is that it also gives us a sense, the other Gospels give us this sense too, that they weren't with Jesus every day of the 40 days after he was resurrected, that they were only seeing him sporadically. I think that's a phenomenal mystery. I've often thought about what the significance of that is, that he's not with them at every moment, but instead that they're just seeing him. Like John chapter 20 indicates it was nearly a week before they saw him the second time. So I just think that's really remarkable. But again, the bigger idea is that there wasn't a lot of one-on-one time with Jesus. There are some that would say, well, Jesus was with them every moment for 40 days, teaching them the New Testament. And that's, when they say that, what's taught in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John isn't the New Testament, that Jesus had to teach that in those 40 days. Well, that's not possible. If we're understanding, the timelines that are given in all four of the accounts, Jesus was not with them enough to have taught them that. So when Jesus said in Matthew 28, teach everybody everything I told you, he was talking about all he taught them in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That was the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's, it's called the gospel. The Sermon on the Mount is called the gospel.
Yeah.
And so it's important that we can see that, because sometimes people say, well, I think everything in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is just Jesus teaching the Old Testament. That's not true.
Okay. I think it's a good point. Good point. Let's see. We had a comment or a question come in from Jimmy. In the beginning of the chapter, were the disciples showing a lack of faith? I don't think so. I don't think so. They were just going. They went back up to the Sea of Galilee and were getting back on with their lives. And of course, Jesus told them to go there, and this is where he will appear to them again here for a very powerful conversation. Any other thoughts? Oh, there was also Judith. She brought up the point that, wrong button. There we go. They caught the fish after Jesus told them to cast their net on the right side of the boat. And that's true. They had not caught anything, but then he told them where to cast their net, and then that's where the school of fish were. And I have no problem with either saying he miraculously knew the fish were there or he calls them to be there. And there's probably some secondary or more subtle messages to be conveyed in regards to the symbolism here of them being told where to cast their nets and the amount of fish that they would pull in. And maybe even connect with the idea that get back to work. And here in a minute, we can pull from a conversation Jesus has with Peter, get back to work type thing.
And this had happened before.
Yes.
And nets did break on a previous occasion.
Yeah. Didn't they have to call in other boats to even help with haul?
They had the two brothers each with their own boat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say that's back in Luke 5 in verse 5 when he first calls the disciples. This happens. So it's interesting that Peter, recognizes, all these things, and he's jumping in the water. I'm going.
Yeah.
And I kind of have that attitude of think later and act now. My wife gives me a hard time for that all the time.
But
I think that's kind of how Peter is. We're going to go. I'm going.
Yeah.
And it's like, you could have waited a minute. We could have taken the boat. But you think about how exciting, and kind of to Brian's point, that Jesus isn't with them all the time. Yeah. So it is significant when he shows up. It's like, we're excited about that. We're going to go talk to the Lord. And I think that's part of the, reason we can say that they hadn't abandoned Christ or abandoned the call there, because if they had, you'd be maybe more embarrassed. You might not want to go to the shore, but he's eager to go talk to Jesus.
Yeah.
The one thing that we didn't, go ahead, Tom, real quick, and then.
Oh yeah. No, I was gonna say, building on what Caleb says there, I think it's interesting. I sometimes, when I see Peter jumping out of the boat, based on the context, I think Peter is still struggling with his denial and his guilt. Yeah. And you know how sometimes when you've done something to somebody and you feel guilty about it, even though you've made amends and so on, you're still struggling to make things right. So I can kind of see the idea of Peter, it's Jesus, and I want him to know that I haven't abandoned him, and that kind of a thing. And he kind of goes to him, is there anything I can do, even though all that's not recorded. But he's excited to see the Lord, and he's not going to abandon him again. So.
Okay. So a couple things here real quick. One thing that we take note of is that in verse 4, let me bring this up here real quick. So just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. So they could see him, but they did not know it was him, but they were still close enough for him to address them with the question, children, do you have any fish? Now, I think as we go down in the text, what was it? They were about 100 yards off from shore. So was that basically a football field? Roughly. But he was able to speak with them in such a way, traveling over the water, maybe makes it sound travels a little farther. But they were able to see him, but they didn't know who he was. He addressed them with the question, do you have any fish? They said no. He was able to tell them from a distance where to cast their nets. And then, verse 7, after that, because of the great quantity, that disciple whom Jesus loved, therefore said to Peter, it is the Lord. At that realization, Peter pulled a Forrest Gump, that kind of what y'all were already talking about.
The sheep know the shepherd's voice. Doesn't he say that?
Yeah.
So that
John chapter 10.
Yeah. But it's just amazing me how far offshore they're described to be.
Yeah.
But yet he's able to holler at them,
It is implied that Jesus had a megaphone.
Well, you think about it. We go back to Luke chapter 5 I was talking about earlier when Jesus preaches that sermon with Peter's boat. It's kind of like a natural amphitheater there too.
Yeah.
That you
Probably
can think
the mountains.
about. So.
Well, and Jesus talked on a boat a lot. If you remember, Jesus would get out on a boat and talk to the people on shore, because you're right, it is a natural Water does amplify sound, so that's interesting.
Plus, you've
Nobody
got
said anything
wind.
about my Forrest Gump comment.
The wind could also do that to some extent.
True, true.
Yeah.
Let's see. They saw, so and so he was already cooking. They already had the fire, and he already had fish on the fire. Verse 9, I thought that was interesting. When he says when they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place with fish laid out on it and bread. Then he said, bring some of the fish that you have caught. So unlike Tom, some people would probably like to eat fish for breakfast. I don't know.
And probably there wasn't enough on the fire to feed them all. And we don't know where Jesus got the fish. He could have miraculously produced them.
He could have
Or
called
he
it.
could have brought them in a basket from some other place. We don't know where he got them really, but he got the fire started, put the fish on there, and I guess the fire would get hotter as the fish cooked. Not a result of the fish cooking, but as time passes. And so we're going to need some more fish, boys.
I would take it as this is he's not a spiritual being, he's able to physically make a fire and put fish on and put bread. Like, he is there physically, I think, is another point you can make too.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. We've got a couple comments I want to try to bring in real quick. He tells them, of course, come and have breakfast. Now, none of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? Because they knew there. And then this was about the third time Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead in John's record here. Just kind of bringing that out there for just a moment.
I guess we have discussed the disciple whom Jesus loved. Have we done that or lately?
Back when he was being carried off to be on trial, we talked a little bit about that, but
I remember doing it at the Lord's Supper too.
Yeah,
when we had the Lord's Supper, or after the Lord's Supper.
But Bob, what's your thoughts on it? Because we clearly won't finish this study today. Because we don't want to rush the next part.
Bob's muted.
Oh. Bob, you got any comments on John being the disciple whom Jesus loved?
Yeah, my thinking is logically it would have to be the inner circle. Peter, James, or John. James, the brother of John, had already been killed. Peter is referred to in the third person. John never refers to himself as John. He only refers to himself and James as the sons of Zebedee, but never a personal reference to identify himself. So my thinking is, out of humility, this is how he refers to himself. And he does seem to have a closer, that's assuming, I guess, the identity. But he is a person that was closer to Jesus in some way because of the events at the table at the Last Supper.
Some people think his mother, the wife of Zebedee, was the cousin of, or maybe even sister of Mary, Jesus' mother.
Yeah, that's an inference. I don't know that it's necessary, but it's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the case, yeah.
From the list of the women in the resurrection accounts.
Yeah. Brian, did you have a thought before we look at the comments? All right, the first one you'll have... Caleb, you raised your hand. Go ahead real quick.
Yeah. Well, I got another question for you guys. Since Bob mentioned it, we always think of this as like humility. They don't mention themselves by name in their own books. But how humble is it to call yourself the one who Jesus loved? I mean, so I have a hard time reconciling that. I just wonder y'all's thoughts on that. Why does he refer to himself as the disciple if he's being humble and not mentioning himself by name?
Well, again, even Matthew refers to himself as Matthew in his gospel. Luke
that's fair.
Was not an apostle. Mark was not an apostle. And so neither one of them would be mentioned naturally in the Gospels. But
unless Mark is the guy that lost his clothes and ran off. He does, and that would be a third person description.
Oh yeah, that was in the Garden of Gethsemane. Yeah. And that was depicted in The Chosen, by the way.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. You know.
Spoilers. I haven't made it that far.
Yeah, I haven't made it that far. Oh, well,
You knew how it was going to end.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, when I think of that expression, John, even though he doesn't mention himself by name, when he's there, he has to identify himself somehow, and that's what I see in that expression. Is he the only one that uses that expression of himself, the disciple whom Jesus loved? That would be my other question. I'm thinking off the top of my head if some of the other Gospels referred to him that way, or whatever from that standpoint. So that's kind of my thought. You know, I do see the humility and not bringing up his name from that standpoint. And I think that is an argument in favor of him as the writer of the gospel, because it wasn't about self-glorification. Even though, as Bob said, Matthew mentions himself by name, which Jews were very interested in names. I'm talking about from the people that you belong to. Yeah, I can't think of the word, but yeah. Okay. So, anyways, you know, lineage, genealogy. Yeah. That's what I was trying to think of.
And my thinking also is that Matthew is not really writing as a witness, because he writes completely in the third person. But John is writing, or at least the author of the fourth gospel, is writing in the first person. And so there would need to be some kind of self-identification there. And
well, does he write in the first person?
Look at verse 24 of this chapter, where he says, "This is the disciple who is bearing witness about these things and who has written these things, and we know that his testimony is true."
Yeah.
I'm assuming that's be taken as a... And then he says, where every one of them to be written, I suppose that the world itself cannot be contained. Seems to be a very...
That's a first person statement, that last one.
Yeah.
But I'd say the rest of it isn't first person. I would say the only time where I see a first person historical account in the New Testament is Acts, Luke, you know, saying we did this and we did that. But otherwise, I would have thought of John as third person.
I got what you're saying.
Well, you could be as right as I am. And I could be as wrong as you are.
Yeah, I think first person would mean he says I did this and I did that, whereas a third person would be he did this and he did that. So when he says he's the apostle that Jesus loved, it is very personal for sure. I think that's really what the key.
And Luke, you're right. So many times Luke would say we, you know, and then you could tell when Luke wasn't with them because of the way he recorded it.
Yeah.
All right, help me through some of the comments here real quick. The first one I'm going to pick up with is Stephanie. She says, and I was trying to figure the context of this, the Old Testament taught to wait on the Lord. Could that possibly be a part of the reason? I wasn't sure what she was referencing with that comment, unless, because they were waiting at the Sea of Galilee. Okay.
Right. I think that's what she...
Okay, that makes perfect sense. I hadn't caught up with that, yeah. And then Judith, she says, they had been fishing all night, as was just mentioned, and caught no fish. Jesus called to them and told them what to do. Could it have been one of Jesus' miracles, although they did not recognize him? I would think so, you know.
Yeah.
Either way, he knew or knew where the fish were or caused the fish to be there. I would think so. And then Liam Tobarada, as well as Laura Clark, both shares John 10:27. And this is what y'all mentioned a while ago about my sheep hear my voice. Earlier, once they were able to hear him in his question, John knew who it was. And then Brian, who is here with us in person, decided to type in the chat room regarding the fishing nets. I think it is neat that the last thing Jesus does with them is just like the first. And this is what Caleb kind of brought up in reference to Luke 5. Brian makes that connection there. Okay. Good points. Good points. Any comments or thoughts?
It's all
All
full
right.
circle. It's weird.
Yeah, exactly. That's where it's so important to study all four gospels. And I'm not confident that studying through the actual, can't remember who did it, but a harmony of the gospels. There's a couple of them. I don't know how.
Yeah, McGarvey,
McGarvey and
Robertson, A.T. Robertson.
Yeah, those are McGarvey's the big one with all the little comments and everything.
Yep.
It is beneficial, I think, to use a harmony, but I think sometimes to fully appreciate, you need to study through each gospel and then begin to kind of stitch them together yourself to kind of help fill it in instead of having it just laid out for you. Both are beneficial, but I think one might help it to stick better when you discover it for yourself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and building on that, John, if you're studying an individual gospel, you know the background behind that gospel. And, that's your goal,
Yeah.
To understand who is it written to, what's its purpose. And then you tie what the other gospels say into that with the foundation of this is the premise behind this gospel. And you can sometimes tie in the other thoughts with the theme of that gospel, or you can distinguish in some instances.
Yeah.
Well,
But take notes.
Each gospel has a purpose.
Yep.
And an audience that they're writing to. So I was trying to point that out, like I'm studying through Matthew on Sunday morning. Like, who is he writing to? Who's his audience? And what is he trying to prove? And you can do that with every single gospel. And don't lose that core message. Sometimes when you put them all together, we lose the core message of the audience and what they're trying to show.
Good point.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're smart. You're smart, Caleb.
He is. Yeah.
My wife would disagree.
That's why we have wives. So it makes
Yeah.
us work harder
They keep us
and
humble.
we'll look really smart to other people. Yeah.
Keep us humble.
Jimmy asks, is there any resource for going through is there an easy resource for going through the Gospels? You can still use a harmony if you can find a harmony of the Gospels. There's several out there that are published.
Yeah, and McGarvey is royalty or public domain.
You
So,
probably
yeah,
find it
you
in some
can-
Bible
you can-
programs online.
Yeah, you can get access to
Yeah.
McGarvey for free with some of
Isn't
the
that the
Bible
fourfold
programs.
gospel?
That's
what
it.
it's called?
Fourfold gospel. And the
Yeah.
thing about McGarvey is he was a member of the church. Was it the Christian church?
I think it's before the split.
Yeah, before the split. So he was a member of the church for whatever that's worth. I'm not sure about Robertson. As far again, Robertson is old enough. I think it's 1800s also. So all those 1800 works you can get hold of them, most of them for free. And A.T. Robertson just lines them side by side is what he does. Whereas McGarvey blends them into a paragraph.
Yeah.
That's the way McGarvey does it versus Robertson just parallels them. And by the way, any resource, Bible study program that allows you to parallel things, you could set them side by side. And
I know that I'm sure other study Bibles do, but the Nelson Open Bible, that as you study through each account, if you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, read any one of those, it's going to give you the parallels or the same accounts as a reference in that heading. And that sometimes is helpful if you want to just study through one, but know where the other accounts are found. I found that to be pretty helpful, that if I want to fill in some more details or something's not clear, or just to get a little different perspective, to go look at those. So
another thing I have found helpful is a book I think it's called The Primacy of Mark, written on the idea that Mark was the first of the Gospels that we now have, and that Matthew and Luke both supplement Mark's smaller Gospel, although there are places in Mark's gospel where he is more thorough than either Matthew or Luke. But for the most part, he is gives very little information, and that Matthew and Luke, by inspiration, of course, elaborate on that, and very many parallels among the three that can I think help people better understand.
Right. Yeah. By the way, I just looked it up on archive.org, or I just looked it up. A.T. Robertson's Harmony of the Gospel is available in a PDF format at archives.org.
Okay. All right.
Or archive, not archives, archive.org. And I'm looking at it right now. So I don't know if you can download it or whatever, but it's there. So like I said, it's public domain.
So
is it the 4 columns?
What's that?
Is it the 4 columns?
Yeah, yes, it is. Yeah, Rob. That's what's neat about Robertson is he sets up the columns, and yeah, like I said, some of our Bible programs do that. But McGarvey, if you look at him, he stitches everything together in the events, which actually makes McGarvey more of a commentary.
Yeah.
A commentary tying the 4 Gospels together.
He does have comments in there.
Yeah, he puts comments in there, and my point is a lot of times when we put the 4 Gospels together and seek to harmonize them, we have to make some judgments.
Yeah.
Where does this belong? In what order would the things go? Because that's what what McGarvey, like I said, he puts an event in a paragraph. What did Jesus say first, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Did he do something before he said something? Or did he say something and then do it? So you're putting your own understanding of the text on it. And that's what a commentary is. That's not designed to dismiss commentaries. They have their place.
Jimmy, real quick, the Bible that I use the Olive Tree Bible program, and I have the New King James Bible in it. This one, when you're studying through the Gospels, and Paul, you referenced the Open Bible earlier, which is really good too. A lot of the section headings in the Gospels will give you the parallel passages to whatever you're reading. If there is a parallel passage, so like this is John 19, when Jesus is buried in Joseph's tomb, but if you come and see, there's parallel to the empty tomb, the different records there. And let's see, but then Mary Magdalene sees the risen Lord, or more to the point, let me come down to, breakfast by the sea, the topic area. There's no other record of this, so there's no cross references to say, hey, Mark wrote about it, Matthew wrote about it. So even those little helps within certain Bibles will help to direct you through the Gospels at the different accounts and everything, or different records, I should say. Brian, real fast, we're almost out of time, but I feel like that you have a very astute point to make about the nets. I think should be shared publicly.
I don't know about that. I do notice that Caleb has his hand up. So if we're gonna pick on somebody, Caleb certainly deserves a first call.
All right, go ahead, Caleb.
Well, I was just gonna make the point, and Tom kind of reflected this, that we're talking about commentaries and different Bible tools, and I know we all agree you got to go back to the Bible first. You got to take everything you read outside the Bible with a grain of salt sometimes. And like Tom mentioned, sometimes McGarvey has to use his own reasoning to order things. And maybe that's not how it happened. Maybe it is. So take everything you read outside the Bible with a grain of salt is all I'll say. And I think we all agree with that. We go back to, let's look at the scripture first and read it for what it says.
It's a good point.
Now, Brian, tell us your point about the nets. You can't get away.
Yeah, well, it's actually, Caleb said something earlier, and I got to thinking about it, and I thought, it's kind of neat. Again, beginning and end, it footnotes with the apostles, but these are both of the times of their commissions, right? So, like, the apostles are called when the net incident happens back in Luke, and it's, and he says, hey, come on, I'll make you fishers of men. Now we have the second net incident, and Jesus is about to give them the Great Commission. But the limited commission wasn't fulfilled. Jesus said, you're not going to finish it before the Son of Man comes. In fact, it's rolled into the Great Commission because you have to go to the Jew first and then to the Greek. So that's, you know, the an element of the Great Commission. So what I think is interesting, it's almost like, you know, the net that tore is the limited commission. You couldn't quite get it done. But the Great Commission, you know, Paul will say in Colossians 1, it's completed. It's accomplished the way it was purposed to. And so it's just, I don't know. I'm not sure I would go so far as to say it's anything more. It could be just a coincidence of the story, but it's just kind of neat. There's something Caleb had said that I got thinking, yeah, that's kind of neat.
That's a sign.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's just interesting that, you know, because I had not thought about you know, Bob said it too. You know, one time the net tears and one time it doesn't. And I thought, well, why is that? And well, maybe there's a reason.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing that's interesting about this is the reaction of Peter on both occasions. In Luke chapter 5,
great point.
Depart from me, for I am a sinful man. He's doubting himself here and has to be restored. So
that's
I mean,
a great point.
So, you know, beginning and so you got bookends of the ministry, beginning and end.
If you want to quote Brian with what he said in your future sermons, make sure you give credit to Truth Factor and then Brian at truthfactor.com. Unless you don't agree with him, then it's strictly Brian at truthfactor.com.
I got the idea from Caleb and Bob. So if we want to go anywhere, if there's a problem,
okay, all right,
we'll see my supervisors.
Speaking of going anywhere, we need to probably stop. We have gone just past our time. We started pretty close. It's been about an hour. But let's plan next week to continue our study through the Gospel of John, chapter 20. We'll pick up with verse 15. And my plans are, Lord willing, to finish our study of John after next week. I'm not sure where we'll go to. We need to have some more discussions, the group and I, if we want to do any topical studies or if we want to get right into our next book study. But hopefully we'll have a definitive answer by the end of next week's study, so we'll know where to direct you to for the week after that. But anyway, thank you so much for joining us. Again, you can email us, send it to questions at truthfactor.com, or email us individually if you like to do that, Paul at, Tom at truthfactor.com. We would definitely love to hear from you. All right, thanks, guys, and thank you. We'll see you back here again next Thursday at 11 o'clock a.m. Central Time for another Truth Factor discussion. You have a wonderful week.